Hello, I'm Peter Deegan, a member of the RSSL QP training faculty, and welcome to the next podcast in our series of My QP Journey. These interviews are aimed at talking with previous QP training alumni with the aim of paying forward their experiences to prospective trainee QPs. Travelling down the QP training journey requires dedication, tenacity, curiosity, and of course a passion for our true customers, our patients. Of course, the first undertaking of anyone wishing to take such a journey is to learn from those who have already trodden that path so that we may gain from their insight, their wisdom, their know-how, and know the best shortcuts and avoid the potholes. It's therefore my pleasure to welcome Mike Hadebe, who has recently completed their QP training journey and successfully passed their QP Viva. Welcome, Mike, and very importantly, many congratulations on your huge achievement. Welcome to the QP community.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's my pleasure to participate in this podcast. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you. It would be good, firstly, Mike, if you could share your background professionally and your work background.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm a pharmacist by profession, and I started out, I trained at King's College. That's where I did my MPharm, and I did my initial sort of pre-registration training in NHS hospitals. And I happened to have as one of the rotations in my pre-registration training, a stint. It was only a couple of days at a hospital down in Essex, where they were doing extemporaneous preparation of creams, and they were doing some unlicensed or specials manufacturing. And in that couple of days, I got talking with the QA manager, just getting an understanding of what it is that was happening, and I was really fascinated by that. So from there, I carried on in my pharmacist career, qualifying as a pharmacist and being registered as a pharmacist in 2014. And then from there, I did the usual rotations as a basic grade pharmacist, specializing in clinical specialties. And again, I came upon a rotation in technical services. And that one was attached with it was a sort of a 50-50 role, half of it in cancer services and half in technical services. So under Section 10, manufacturing. So that really kind of opened up the world of manufacturing technical services. And I was really intrigued by that as a career path. So that's what kind of really got me engaged with quality and manufacturing. I then found as I was progressing through the years as a senior pharmacist, I decided to specialize in technical services with a stint in quality assurance and clinical trials. So I got a job at a major hospital in London that had a big focus on clinical trials. So I had the opportunity to be a specialist QA pharmacist at that hospital, overseeing a specials manufacturing unit. We had an MIA IMP licenses there as well, and we also had a WDA. So that was my first proper involvement with licensed manufacturing. And throughout my pharmacy career, from pre-reg through to QA specialist, I had the good fortune of having some very good mentors, people that I could look up to, role models. And, a couple of those people really nursed me through my initial career, first as a pharmacist and then introduction to QA, and ultimately through to my QP sponsors in my current role. So as I was doing my QA specialist role in London, I identified that there was a career in QP ship. And I, like many QP trainees, I was trying to map out the way to achieve that goal. And unfortunately, it meant I had to leave my previous position. And fortunately, I had the good fortune of getting a role at my current place, my current employer. And there I've had a huge opportunity to gain lots of experience and also to be surrounded by QPs, which is something that I didn't initially have in my hospital role. So yeah, that's kind of my background to date. I've kind of just graduated through my pharmacy career and ultimately ended up in a technical services slash QA role, and ultimately have had the opportunity to develop further in a clinical trials manufacturing space.
That's a perfect summary of the whole structure of our podcast today. So let's break it down. I'm very interested and would like to very much explore your pharmacy qualification. Many QPs are biologists, chemists. There are pharmacists as well.
Mm,
And what I want to do in the guidance notes, it says, and I'll quote it, the applicant is expected to be able to demonstrate the application of this knowledge through experience of at least 2 years, in brackets, 1 year for a pharmacist.
mm,
We know, however, that the feedback from assessors is that many first written applications get rejected because the candidate actually hasn't met the breadth expected of experience. And I think that's where many QP trainees don't understand the experience and practicality is as much, if not a bit more important
mm,
than the theoretical training in itself.
mm,
So I want to explore this a bit more. So when you started your QP journey
mm.
as a pharmacist, did you read that paragraph and go, okay, I have to do less, and you did less practical training?
Certainly. I mean, when I was looking at the very early on, looking on at the application and the eligibility criteria, yeah, I did think like, oh, I'm a pharmacist. It means only 1 year as opposed to two. But when I actually got to start actually doing the formal courses and doing the training, I quickly realized that actually the pharmacist training alone is not going to fast track me through to Viva success. It certainly helped. There are things in the pharmacy course and in the pharmacy practice as a clinical pharmacist that you don't need to learn from first principles because it's an inherent part of your professional practice. But there is nothing quite like that lived experience of working through a license unit, looking at a deviation when things have gone wrong, facing those pressure situations. The pharmacy qualification and experience alone, without that lived experience, it doesn't really prepare you. So you need both. Actually, you need the experience more, I would say.
I really like what you say there, Mike, and it emulates what my other QP pharmacist colleagues have also said, that they found it quite hard to reconcile experience gained as a pharmacist, which is great patient facing experience, better than a chemist can achieve in some ways, but not much manufacturing QA experience required as a QP. And there's that juxtaposition there, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do you meet the requirements of a practical working QA focused qualified person and marry the pharmacy theoretical elements and practical elements?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the pharmacy experience, whether it be hospital pharmacy experience, where you're dispensing medicines to patients, I think we don't struggle with seeing the patient in the heart of everything we do. It's those things that are a lot more pure manufacturing or things that you really won't have the opportunity. I'm talking cleaning validation, those type of elements that you really have been exposed to it. So that 1 year experience requirement, it helps, but you can't rely on that alone. You actually do have to go and experience the full breadth of the study guide because the pharmacy alone is just not going to be sufficient.
How did you reconcile that with the wording in your application form? Because your application form has to jump out to the assessor that you've done this properly. You haven't just said, I watched, I gained an understanding of. The guidance notes are pretty clear, don't say those. You have to have shown that you've been involved in an active quality role. How did you reconcile that in your application form in the wording? Say, I've gained some experience as a pharmacist. How did you translate that to a quality role?
You really do have to apply that knowledge in within the context of the application. So, for instance, in my clinical pharmacy practice, I was exposed to reg affairs indirectly, but I'm still exposed to it, whether it is doing medicines information queries to MA holders or in assessing pharmacy manuals for clinical trials and interpreting some of those requirements. So, it's about demonstrating how you applied it. I was fortunate enough that in my pharmacy practice, there was a strong element of manufacturing involved. So both specials and unlicensed manufacture. In unlicensed manufacture, in NHS, we use the Beanie Guide. That's QA all the way through. So just demonstrating how I apply that. Same as the experience in both MS and MIA IMP repackaging units. So I was able to then say, well, okay, I've overseen the manufacture of the packaging of batches of emergency crash bags for use in ICU. So in that context, it's still a licensed product. It still has to comply with that. However, you're applying your knowledge of the usage of the product in an ICU context to support in batch disposition if there's anything that's wrong with the batch or there's a deviation involved. So in there, I was able to demonstrate how I was using my clinical knowledge and understanding of what the product is ending up in versus my understanding of the regulatory requirements. It was not easy. It's not easy to write the application for, but you do have to really think about how the clinical pharmacy practice is applied within the context of the study guide.
I think that's really interesting because at the end of our journey, there's a patient, whether it's an ICU patient, whether it's a patient on a ward, the flow of the product is slightly different. The manufacturing, as you say, or the repackaging, etc., still has to follow the requirements of the marketing authorization holder, and that's your role as a QP, whether you're in a hospital or whether you're in a manufacturing plant.
In the end, I was really helped by my role in an MIA IMP site, and that really beefed up my, my application. But I certainly was able to demonstrate how my pharmacy practice was applicable to the various elements. I mean, in the study guide, you talk about medicinal chemistry and therapeutics. That's pharmacy profession all the way through. So that was an easier part of the application to write versus ones where it's talking about MA. Okay, there you then have to say, well, I've not been as involved in MA, but this is what we do in with a clinical trial application. So it's then applying those principles across. But yeah, there were some elements of the application that were easier to write than others.
I want to move on now to the role of the sponsor. So, for those listening, what's the role of a sponsor and how critical are they in supporting your QP training journey?
Oh, the sponsor is absolutely key. And a sponsor who is involved, even better. I would not have been able to do this without the help of my sponsor. I was very fortunate that in my workplace, I had a collection of QPs who were very willing to give up their time and mentorship to be able to assist me. And they were effectively coordinated, or rather, they liaised with my sponsor and they challenged me in different ways. Without them, led by my sponsor, yeah, I would not have been able to get to this stage. So, the real value of the sponsor, in my experience, is in challenging you. You know, there'll be things that you will know from experience, but their role is to really help you in filling in the gaps, identifying your areas of weakness, posing questions in a different way in preparation for the Viva. And I found my sponsor very helpful for that, just as a foil and a mirror to reflect how I'd progressed from when I'd initially started the process through to the frantic days before the Viva. And that consistent presence of my sponsor in just giving me feedback, honest feedback, I found that incredibly invaluable. So yeah, a sponsor is absolutely critical. An involved sponsor, even more so.
It's a very close relationship together, isn't it?
Yeah, they are the person who there has to be a huge degree of trust because ultimately there's a huge responsibility on them as well because ultimately they are recommending you forward to release batches. So they've got to be trusting that you're ready for that responsibility. And vice versa, as the mentee, there's a tremendous amount of effort that goes into preparing to be a QP as a trainee. So you need to be trusting of the person who's giving you feedback, the person who's not signing you off, but the person who is overseeing your development and your presentation to the joint professional body. So yeah, it's a very, very special relationship.
And it sounds like you've worked in an environment with more than one QP, which is sometimes a bit of a luxury.
Yeah.
So you had quite a good support network there of QPs?
Yeah, no, I was very, very fortunate to have that. What it allowed was to hear different voices there will be many a scenario that will be presented in the course of day-to-day working, and you get to hear the different voices. QPs, we all have different strengths, both inherently to our own personalities, and hearing how the same scenario is viewed through the lens of one person versus another, it just gives for a more well-rounded assessment of the situation. So it was very, very helpful. But it also influenced, I'd like to think, my development because I had different voices. So hopefully my practice will reflect that well-rounded nature that's been born out of having a range of mentors in the workplace.
I like that very much. Different voices. I've never heard it spoken like that. And I totally get that. When I did my QP training, I was working for a major pharmaceutical company. There were several trainees, and every single lunchtime, every single break, we threw questions at each other. And I like that different voice because they've got different backgrounds. My colleague on the sterile plants was a microbiologist. I'm a chemist, so I sort of had to think as a microbiologist, right? And then they had to think like a chemist when I bombarded them with questions, etc. So I really like that. I think that's really good. And
Mm,
I reiterate that some people find it very difficult to get the right sponsor. Some people may well have more than one sponsor throughout their study period.
mm,
But whichever way you choose and whosoever you choose, it is a very close bond and a close relationship. And I like that phrase that you just said there, that it's about trust of each other as well.
mm. No, 100%.
Well, thank you for that feedback about the sponsor. It's very common feedback that all our previous interviews have given. The role of the sponsor is critical. Your guide, your mentor, your coach, your arbiter, and then your support network around it, and other people who don't have access to working QPs in the same environment. Sometimes use the QP forums and alumni to get those sort of questions are available for them.
Yeah.
I want to cover now a bit more about the knowledge attainment now. We've got two tracks. We've got to have a core knowledge requirement, and you may well, as you talked about being a pharmacist, you got that through your primary degree and experience. And there are other very clear elements of practical exercise. At the very top of the particularly the UK joint study guides, there are three foundation knowledge elements, and that is law and admin, role and professional duties of the QP, and pharmaceutical quality systems.
Mm.
Did you take theoretical training in those three modules, or did you use practical assessment and background and learning off track?
Yeah, so a bit of both. So the pharmaceutical quality systems, I was confident in my previous working experience of that, but I still signed up to a study program that covered the full range, the full gamut of modules. So yes, I did do that. The theoretical understanding of the law and admin and the legal duties of QP, yes, 100%. I had to do that. Coming from an NHS background, it was something that wasn't at the forefront of my practice. I had to learn it very quickly when I joined the organization that I work for, which is contract manufacturing, and working with QPs. Very quickly, you see the roles and responsibilities of the QP in practice. So it was very good to, as part of my study program, to get a formal training in that to better understand where my QPs were coming from. And it also helped with just cement and give that baseline understanding of law and admin. So yes, I did do that. The applied knowledge, or rather the learning through work, came in significantly through a range of sources. Firstly, through just carrying out the work of a contract manufacturing organization, we had to be familiar with the legal requirements for not only the UK and EU, but for foreign territories, understanding the relationships between the organization and other organizations in terms of QP requirements. So all that cemented my understanding in routine duties, legal requirements, and just consolidated the formal studies that are carried out. And then going back to my QP mentors, that was a frequent discussion about legal duties, law and admin. They really pushed me until that knowledge, that core knowledge, was almost second nature. So the workplace mentors really facilitated development of that familiarity and competence in those core modules.
From my experiences working as a QP, those three foundation knowledge elements just a part of everyday working. They knit together. They're that well, literally at the top of the pyramid there.
Yeah.
How did you ensure that your application form truly demonstrated what you've just said, that you knitted the foundation elements together? And reading it back with you and your sponsor, how did you make sure that it jumped out for the benefit of an assessor to demonstrate that you do this on a day-to-day basis? It's not just theory.
Yeah, that was hard because the hardest part was demonstrating that, but ensuring that my application would not be 100 pages. Throughout the course of my training, I kept a log of all the noteworthy demonstrations of the core foundational modules. So, for give you an example, I was involved in my current role in setting up an electronic quality management system. Now, clearly, if you're going to be involved in setting up an EQMS, you need to understand basic QMS. So that was evident in my application. I made that point really strongly. The legal duties and roles and responsibilities of a QP, I made sure that I articulated that through giving real examples of how I apply that, but linking them so that I would be able to demonstrate both routine duties and legal kind of in the same sentence, just to keep the word count down. And how did I do that? So giving examples of when I'd, for instance, done duties that are delegatable by a QP. So batch review, making sure that validation is done in compliant with the MA or CTA, articulated that to say, look, I've been carrying out duties of a QP that are delegatable. So I'm linking that with Annex 16. So just being particular with my wording, demonstrating that I understand that those are routine duties, they're delegatable. I've been involved in that delegation. So that's how I was able to present that and keep the word count down equally as importantly.
I really like that. I think it's so easy when you first start to draft it. So I gained experience. I have a theoretical knowledge, and it's having that mind's eye. It's almost when you did a deviation, you almost take yourself back to a lucid moment when you were doing that.
Mm,
It's trying to convey that feeling in your application form so that it jumps out to the assessor. This person did that, actually did that.
mm, mm. Yeah, that is the key thing. So just being specific and particular in how you word the application to demonstrate that you're not talking about it in an abstract manner, but you've actually been involved in it. So yeah, that's how I managed to demonstrate that.
So we've talked about the three core foundation modules that are a must have and a must know and a must do. There are other modules stipulated in the requirements. Did you exempt yourself from any of the training modules because you felt that you had practical knowledge and theoretical experience already, either through your degree or practical elements? For example, I'm an analytical chemist, so I didn't do the analysis and testing module, but for my diploma, I did a dissertation, and on the application form, I was able to demonstrate that experience. So, which did you choose? Which did you not choose? How did you approach that?
Okay. So I didn't exempt myself from any of the modules. So the training provider that I attended, all the modules came as part of the training pack. So I fortunately had the option to cover all of them. But the way that I approached it was in my application was demonstrating that I'm not an expert in them, but I do have a baseline understanding in them. So, for instance, you talk about the analytical testing. As part of my training, I had the good fortune of visiting a contract lab and gaining practical insight into how certain things were done. I reflected that in my application and also liaising with my internal laboratory at my current workplace. My involvement within that and overseeing that was also reflected. But the level of reflection was reflective of my level of expertise in the subject. So demonstrating core understanding of what are the risks, how do I apply the knowledge, but not claiming to be an SME in it. So yeah, that's kind of how I approached it. The one that I could have probably opted not to do was the quality system. But because it came as part of the pack, I just did the whole lot. And on reflection, I think that was a huge benefit because it challenged, again, some of the preconceived ideas that I had about quality systems. So, I'd worked in the NHS, I joined a contract manufacturing site. Again, it is hearing a different perspective on something that you think is not a bad thing sometimes. So I benefited from that experience regardless.
It's those different voices again, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I really like what you say there because I did a postgraduate diploma. I did lots of essays and lots of theory, and I thought, oh, you know what? I think I'm pretty good. I'm getting good marks on my essays, etc. But then there's a real practical world on the shop floor, or in the laboratory, or in the aseptic suite that you just say, ah, yeah, that's different than writing an essay, isn't it? Getting that theory. So getting the core knowledge from a learned lecturer, tutor who's been there, gives you that different voice. Then you can experiment with your own environment as you go back into the workplace from the course.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I had a good example of this, in the workplace. So done a module on going back again to analytical QC testing, just doing a module understanding method validation in a cold lecture environment where it's all abstract and you've not actually been involved with it. And then seeing it in practice in the workplace, in the laboratory, and speaking to the QC manager and actually getting to understand the practical application of it, it made my understanding of it so much better. I actually had a question on this in the Viva, and because I had that lived experience of looking at an analytical method validation report, going through it in detail, having had the opportunity to be taught it in a formal space, I was very comfortable about it. Yes, I'm not an SME on it, but I've been exposed to it. I've learned it. So yeah, that was a positive result of, I guess, have attending all the lectures and all on the full breadth of the module.
That's a really nice analysis there. I was going to say, were you asked any questions on analytical chemistry in your Viva? Because the role of the assessor is to evaluate whether you have demonstrated a full knowledge and understanding of the syllabus, the curriculum, whatever you want to call it, the requirements. You're not expected to be an expert or an SME, but you're expected as a qualified person to know the core requirements, to be able to ask the right questions, to bring in the right people. And when we're talking about stability failures or dissolution failures, you know the right words and you know what the experts are saying to be able to make that safety, efficacy, and quality decision on behalf of your patient that you're certifying the batch against. That's what it's about. It's to make sure that you have sufficient knowledge to be able to make that professional judgment with your experts by your side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a strange qualification being a QP because from the outside, before you actually get into the journey, there's a perception that you've got to be the expert on everything. But when you actually get involved in the training and you come out on the other side, you realize that no, you're not the expert in everything. Your skill is knowing, understanding enough to be able to do that risk assessment, decision, and be crucially being able to interrogate the data, interrogate the situation, bring in the SMEs, and ultimately make up that decision. And there is no single, I know it's not a cliche, but there is no single qualification that allows for that. It's that experience.
Well, let's bring in Annex 16 into here, 1.7, points 1 to 21, delegated responsibilities. Essentially, what that annex is saying, you've got to know and trust what everybody else has done on your behalf without them seeing that activity. And I always jokingly say, you don't know their first names, but you know the right questions to ask or be provided with the right answers which are credible enough and you understand it enough. I have to say, my dad always used to say, if you haven't understood the question, be honest and tell them.
Mm.
I haven't understood a word you've said there. Can you repeat that so that I can understand? Again, my experience, I remember I was doing my QP training. I was mainly oral solid dose background from a generics company. I joined a big pharma company and they
Mm.
shoved me into sterile manufacture for my QP. And first week in steriles, I had an autoclave validation report shoved in front of me. I didn't have a clue. That wasn't my job to review the sterilization validation report itself, but it was there to be assured that the
Mm.
sterilizer was validated and people were able to walk me through that slowly, surely, and understand the right requirements and the key requirements of the load and the configuration, etc., and why.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really important to be comfortable and honest with yourself, saying, I don't know, and seeking to find out from the people who do know. And I think that's a really, really important trait because if you don't know, you cannot fumble your way as a QP. You've got to be certain, you've got to be convinced. And to do that, you've got to be honest first with yourself and know to ask the question. So, yeah, I completely concur with that.
We're not automatons. We have to have that interaction and dialogue.
Mm.
Being a QP is knowing the right level of information sufficient to be able to make that safety, efficacy, and quality evaluation prior to certification.
Mm.
Because we've got a patient out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Interesting about your experiences there in terms of taking the modules. You essentially, the package allowed you to take them all, and there were those extra voices that really helped you understand a different way of thinking, to have a professional knowledge
Yeah.
and awareness to be able to make that critical judgment yourself based upon the experts' information and advice. So that's really great. I now want to move on to the application form. As we discussed earlier about the guidance notes, 2.2, the study guide, is also very clear of the practical requirements. In your Viva, how many questions related to the theoretical components of the study guide versus questions relating to how you applied that in a practical scenario and wrote that down on your application form?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say in the Viva, about maybe 60% was on the theoretical knowledge. And really, that is law and admin, the roles and duties of a QP. And yes, that was a big chunk of the question, but it was also repeated, but in its application in the scenarios that I got, whether it be a supply chain scenario, you're testing again, can I demonstrate application? Whether it be a deviation or recall situation, can I demonstrate those? So I'll say it was 60%, but I then had to demonstrate that I actually knew what I was talking about in the application of that knowledge in a scenario question. Interestingly, or not, the dosage forms were not the ones that I'd put in my application. So my background, my qualifying experience is in solid dose IMP. The scenarios that I got were in inhalers, pressurized dose inhalers. I had to talk about the manufacture of pressurized dose inhalers. I had a scenario, things gone wrong in a sterile formulation. And then they did introduce a packaging failure. So my tablet formulations did come in eventually. But I got very much the sense that they were looking to assess my application of knowledge in an unfamiliar context, in an unfamiliar territory of formulation, but backing up all that I'd said about my theoretical understanding, backing up all that I'd said about my theoretical knowledge in a context of applying it within a given scenario. So yeah, 60% theoretical, 40% demonstrate that how you'd actually apply that theoretical knowledge.
So, did the application form and the way that you filled it in help you in your Viva?
I think it did. I think it really did. I made it quite clear and bold that I'm an IMP uh, person. So I was not asked dosage forms that were way off the mark. The way that I wrote the application form did help in how I performed at the Viva because I was able to reiterate elements that I'd referenced in my application form. So, for instance, when I was asked in a rogue tablet scenario, and they were asking me how I'd handle that situation, they said, well, let's say it's one of your dosage forms. We had a light-hearted moment when I said, well, if it's my dosage forms, then it's a placebo. So, the safety element is a little bit different. So I was able to use my application in that way to highlight that I am an IMP person and bring in the elements that I'd actually written in my application with respect to the scenarios. So yes, it did help.
So what you've said there, Mike, is there was a clear link in some of the questions that were asked against your application form. In that solid dose packaging scenario, you were able to lift that, what you'd put in your application form, to be able to answer the question. In the Viva, with hindsight, were there any areas in your application form which you would have improved based upon the questions you got asked?
The elements that I would have improved. So going back to the core modules. So I got asked, unsurprisingly, about recent updates, recent changes to legislations, being that, I was one of the first candidates to be interviewed after the Windsor framework came in, where I'd written my application, that part of the module quite a while ago, that element wasn't reflected in that. So I think where I might, if I were to do it again, what I would do next time is just go through the core modules again prior to actual submission to make sure that I've demonstrated application of any recent changes, because those came up quite a lot in my application. None of them were there because I'd written the application quite a while back. So I got the sense that I was challenged a lot on how to demonstrate application of recent or knowledge of recent changes. So I think that's where I would probably improve on if I do it next time.
Great example being the Windsor framework. I'm pretty sure you probably got asked a few questions on that one.
Yeah.
But what you're saying, I think, is really important. Your locked application could have been submitted months ago. What you're saying is do a bit of due diligence prior to the Viva to make sure that recent updates, the Windsor framework implementation being a great example, are current in your mind, because you might just get those questions asked to demonstrate your ability to keep up with regulatory changes, for example.
Mm, absolutely. So my application, I submitted. There was quite a gap. By the time I was invited to Viva, the information that demonstrated as evidence of how I keep up was out of date. It's a big document, the application form, and in the weeks before the Viva, you really focused on delivery. But it is worth just going through what you've written and re-familiarizing yourself, because it will very well be asked of you. And if you've not looked at it recently or any gaps there, you don't want to be in a situation whereby you're not sure about the content of your application. So yeah, definitely.
Great feedback, great experience, great learning. I ask everybody the same question now. How did you approach the writing of your application form? Did you do it as you went along, or did you do it at the end?
I should have wrote it as I went along, but I didn't. What I did was I kept a log, I kept a note of major achievements, accomplishments, or noteworthy things that I achieved in the workplace that I thought this warrant going into my application. So I kept a note of that separately. But then just had dedicated time to just go through my application and really write it, pulling all that information and the formal training that I'd received, the elements that I'd covered within that. It was quite a taxing experience. I wish I'd done it as I was going. It would probably have made life a little bit easier.
You followed the same path that most people do in filling it in at the end. I once read a very interesting article on brain chemistry and memory, and that we only lay the memories down that we want to, but also as well, our short-term memory fades very quickly. So we've only got a perception of what we actually did if we haven't written down the facts
Mm.
immediately. So I think the consensus of opinion is everybody says, I wish I'd have filled my application form in, particularly my practical experiences. I did this deviation did this for me, I learned that from that deviation in the moment. It's the same advice that we give on our auditing training courses, that write down your audit notes straight away and start to draft your audit report straight away, because in 2 to 3 weeks, you might have a different memory or perceptual memory of what went on. So very common though.
Yeah. In the process of going through a QP training, you're almost, well, at least I found, I was waiting for that moment to say, okay, now I feel confident to start writing the application. But you save yourself a lot of stress and hassle by just getting started and documenting it. It will come good in the end. That will be the key advice.
Sage-like advice, Mike, sage-like advice. My final question, Mike, is a reflection of your QP journey as a whole. And for those coming down the QP journey path that you've trodden so eloquently today, what are the 3 pieces of advice that you would give anybody who is currently traveling along that journey towards the Viva?
So number one is persevere. Persevere. It's not the easiest of roads, but there is an end to it. So persevere. Number two, utilize the network. I found that the QP community, whether it be trainee QPs, whether it be QPs, is incredibly generous and willing to guide and mentor trainee QPs. So rely on that network for experience. And number three, I don't know whether this could be classified advice or just some observation. There's a huge element of luck in getting the workplace, the mentor that is conducive to developing your training. I was incredibly fortunate to have all those 3 elements. So if you can get a right involved sponsor and a work environment that is supportive and conducive to that, and you've got perseverance and you've got a good network that you can rely on, I think you've got the 3 ingredients to make it. So that would be my advice to any trainees.
Thank you. Great, great advice. Really like that. Have you certified any batches now that you're a QP?
Oh, now just waiting on the good people at the MHRA to get license variations sorted before I start certifying any batches. But hopefully it will be soon.
Oh, and I'm sure you're looking forward to that day. It's a real badge of honor day when it does happen. I remember getting a round of applause when I certified my first batch in the batch relief office many years ago, because people know the hard work that's gone behind your ability to be able to put your signature there on behalf of our true customer, our patients. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to that first batch.
Well, good luck, Mike. Thank you for sharing your QP journey today. It's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for your insight and your openness for the benefit of others. And I wish you great success as a working QP in the future.
Thank you very much, Peter. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my journey so far. So thank you very much.
Oh, and I'm sure people will benefit from it highly.
Brilliant. Thank you.